A few years ago, there were quite a lot of people around the world saying we've got too much America in this place. That was what time the French talked about the hyperpuissance that was the United States. And people seem to assume that we have this unipolar world in which the Americans would just do what they liked. Going around the place now, I hear, even from some countries that are not great friends of the United States, where are the Americans? Why aren't the Americans doing this? Why aren't they guaranteeing this? Why aren't they helping us out on this? You hear it in the Middle East now. I heard an Iraqi not very long ago saying, why aren't the Americans coming back in? We need them. So, have we moved? Has there been this decisive shift from the hyperpuissance to the, if you like, the selective, almost the selfish superpower? It's only going to intervene when it wants to, and isn't really going to police the global commons anymore.
Well, I don't know whether I'm in the 10% or not, but if you set the standard, Phil, at I have to meet a standard that says we're going to police the global commons, I don't think so. Not alone, and not anytime soon again. Because I think if you look at all the polling in the United States, what do you see? People are exhausted from Iraq. They're exhausted from Afghanistan. But they do not, in any of these polls, say that we should step back from the world entirely. When the questions are asked, should the United States step back now, make our country stronger so that we can again participate as a sensible power in the world, people say, yes, that's what we'd like to do. When the polls say, should the United States continue to lead, for example, in these trade negotiations, the previous panel talked about the TTIP and the TTP, yes, people in the United States say. I think there has been a big shift in American public opinion as the president has moved with a very large coalition against ISIS or ISIL, whichever you prefer to call it. And when you talk about a selfish superpower, I don't think the act of sending American forces to help out on the Ebola crisis is an act of selfishness at all. So I don't think that's the answer to this question. I think a lot of Americans are trying to debate for themselves the first question that you put up there. What we face here is a systemic set of disorders. And I think you get a couple of answers to that. First is, I think, the answer that Henry Kissinger is putting out in this new book, World Order, which I've been kind of working my way through, which is to say there is a systemic problem in the sense that there are now different visions, as you say, of world order. There's a Western vision, you might consider it, based on the Westphalian system. But there's a different vision in Russia. There's a different vision from Iran. There's a different vision in China. And so there is a debate in the world about what constitutes order. And the second thing I think is interesting, as Americans over the past 5 or 10 years have thought about their own diplomacy and their own role in the world, was very much like a lot of the conversation in the previous panel. How do you deal with climate change? How do you deal with transnational threats? How do you deal with the trafficking in human beings? And American diplomacy started to look at those as a focus of attention. But what does that have to say to an Assad, to a Putin who acts as he did in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, to questions, as you put it, in the South China Sea? So there's a balancing act here between kind of a new kind of 21st century diplomacy, an outlook that I think many Americans would like to have, and yet a diplomacy that has to deal with these very hard problems that are out there in the world.